Among the people watching it very closely is my next guest, Emily Jashinsky. She's a culture editor at the Federalist, a co-host of Counterpoints as well, and the fill-in host for Megyn Kelly last night as the debate was going on. Emily, good to have you with us today.
Hey, Vince. Thanks for having me.
Fascinating to watch these guys fight it out. It's so funny how, animated they are in light of the fact that none of them is going to be the nominee.
That's a really good reminder. Sometimes it feels like we're watching a normal debate and you have to actually sort of snap back into reality and realize the guy who's up by double digits, and double digits, by the way, not just in the national polling average, but basically in every early voting state, he's not even on the stage. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting just to hear the inter-party debates on some of these issues and to kind of have these representatives from different sides of the conservative spectrum. You know, somebody who's really gotten to the point where they're borderline Democrat, like Chris Christie, but also somebody with such a neoconservative foreign policy like Nikki Haley, be pressed by Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis pressing Nikki Haley on trans issues. There's always something interesting about it, even if it doesn't matter at all in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I mean, but it does helpfully, I think, expose that there is, among Republican leaders, if you can call them that there is, unfortunately, some holdouts from sanity, right? So, if Nikki Haley is up there saying it's fine for parents to trans their kids, and Chris Christie is saying that the Justice Department is not corrupt, everything seems to be fine, and Donald Trump is only being held accountable for his own actions. It's like, what land do these people come from?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 100%. I actually think, I know people are getting a little annoyed with Vivek. I think there's a hardcore contingent that has some great reasons to like Vivek Ramaswamy. I thought his sort of very performative, loud act, which can be very entertaining, and he does make some good points. I thought it came off a little differently when you only had 4 candidates on the stage, as opposed to, when you had 10, they're all jockeying for time, and it was extra entertaining. But I really, really think that the benefit to having him up there is even Ron DeSantis hasn't totally embraced sort of the MAGA movement. That's actually maybe been one of the big problems with his candidacy. And Vivek being there actually really forces these candidates to answer to, I think, positions that reflect the median Republican voter more than a lot of the positions these candidates have been taking. And I include in that Ron DeSantis, who was supposed to be the opposite of that. So, there is, to your point, Vince, there really is some value in seeing these clashes happen.
Yes, definitely, because it speaks to kind of the way a lot of Republicans in Washington are. They kind of run the gamut between all of those people that were on that stage, from Chris Christie, who really is just a cable news commentator, to be honest with you, the kind that most broadcast networks like because he voices positions that Democrats agree with, all the way to Vivek Ramaswamy, who is channeling, as you point out, the MAGA base, the people who, like Trump, want to see him be returned to the presidency or would like at least his policies to return to the presidency.
And, I thought that was the real benefit of this debate that was hosted by News Nation, and you had Megyn Kelly and Eliana Johnson of the Washington Free Beacon, part of the moderators, because they don't absolutely despise the positions of Republican voters and actually Republican voters themselves. They don't see in these positions bigotry and hatefulness and racism and resentment. No, they have a fundamental mutual respect for Republican voters, and that allowed them to have much better questions than any of the other corporate outlets who've hosted debates so far. And I would note, I think it's very odd. The RNC came out with an announcement today that they're doing a couple of debates in January with CNN.
Yeah, what is that?
After this, it's bizarre. I mean, after this experiment in really allowing independent journalists and people who are ideologically more aligned with Republican voters to host a debate, after it's so successful, it goes so well, they turn around within 24 hours and say they're going to give CNN an opportunity to launder its bias as neutrality in the interest of what? Helping Republican voters decide who they want to pick for president of the United States? I mean, it's absurd. It's completely out of touch and just so tone deaf today.
Doesn't it kind of feel like it's a middle finger to the right? Like for the RNC to do that? Because remember, I mean, the conversation that led up to this debate, where you get the Free Beacon and Megyn Kelly up on that debate stage, and Megyn Kelly's been a fascinating story all the way back to her, hosting the first debate in 2016 and mixing it up with Trump. But then after her, her leaving the news business and getting out of, the mainstream news business of Fox and the NBC world, she's kind of broken out and done her own thing, and she's been fantastic. She's just been aggressive. I know you're close to her. You go on her show a lot. She's been great, and I thought she was a perfectly fitting moderator last night, and it felt like this was responsive to the concerns that the right had, meaning like the base. Republicans were looking at this going, why does the RNC keep on doing all these legacy media debates? That's not what we were told we were going to get. And so this was different, and that was nice. And now it's back to form, the CNN thing?
Right, within 24 hours. I mean, really, it was within 12 hours. I agree with the middle finger point. And yeah, Megyn is really interesting. I'm obviously biased, but I thought the whole debate, the whole production of the debate was just so much more illuminating for Republican voters. And the RNC owes it to their voters to organize debates that are helpful to their voters. Not that are helpful to them with their donors, but debates that are helpful to the voters. And if I were one of the remaining candidates, I would very seriously consider refusing to comply with the RNC, putting them in that situation, or I would make it very clear that I'm coming into that debate to debate with CNN, probably more than the other candidates, because listen, Vince, you and I both agree these candidates should get the toughest possible questions. And that happened last night. It's just the questions weren't laundering biased framing as neutral framing. They weren't claiming that facts aren't facts. They were actually so smart. The exchange between Megyn Kelly, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie on trans ideology and children, that was fact-based. It was sharp. It was tough. And it was so much more useful than CNN, any 5 minutes of a debate so far.
CNN would have never asked that question. CNN would not be, there would be no conversation whatsoever about the abuse of children when it comes to this deranged gender ideology. None. They wouldn't even dare to ask it. They'd be too scared to even suggest it, and that they'd be fired or that they'd lose advertisers, something. But Megyn did ask about it, and that was good. I thought that was useful, and that's why it's meaningfully different, and at least it's grounded in reality.
Yeah, and I think it was CNN that confronted Joe Biden with a trans child back when he was running in 2020 in a town hall. And that was when Biden said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing him, but to the effect of, yes, gender transitions for minors, I'm totally okay with it. That will be protected under my administration. So CNN's happy to talk about trans ideology. They're happy to talk about the border. They're happy to talk about all of these things. But the way that they're pressing candidates, Republican candidates on them is, okay, so tell me why you're a bigot. Okay, tell me why you hate transgender people. And listen, candidates, again, they should be able to answer those questions,
yes,
but those questions are not neutral. And the networks, the RNC is letting the networks pretend that those are neutral questions when they absolutely are not. They're letting networks lie to voters, and they're letting networks make money off of lying to their voters.
Yeah.
There's just no reason for it anymore.
All right, let me move to the issue of money with you for a moment. Now, I know you said that in your view there was kind of a mixed bag with Vivek last night. I thought Vivek was great throughout, and I thought that he did a nice job of emphasizing how Nikki Haley's time in politics has led to her being enriched. And he said, look, she's very corrupt. And if I can add something to the stack on that particular beat. This week we found out that Democrat mega donor Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, has given a massive donation to Nikki Haley's presidential campaign, $250,000 to her super PAC. And she's been asked about this. I think as recently as this morning, she was asked about it, and she said she doesn't really even know who that is, which is preposterous because if you're this high up in American politics, you should know who Reid Hoffman is. He's one of the most prolific Democrat donors in the country. He funded the lawsuit by E. Jean Carroll against Trump. He's made it his life's work to destroy Trump. He promised in this campaign he will do everything he can to destroy Trump. And he also, by the way, at one point funded a disinformation campaign in Alabama. And he would go on to apologize for it, but he's like he was responsible for paying for fake news. This is like the worst person. This is like the George Soros guy. So what's the deal here, Emily, like with this big Democrat money going towards Nikki Haley?
Yeah, I mean, and we saw this from Jamie Dimon as well, obviously the head of J.P. Morgan, who's said something to the effect of, Democrats, you might want to consider supporting Nikki Haley because she's probably the best chance to beat Donald Trump. So I think that's really what this is about, is that actually and Nikki Haley mentioned this in the debate last night, it's true, there are some Wall Street power brokers who were initially thinking, hey, maybe we'll consolidate behind Ron DeSantis early in this race. He seems like a viable candidate. He seems more palatable to Donald Trump. Now, a lot of those voters or a lot of those donors got scared off by the totally false book ban narrative and started to see Ron DeSantis as, maybe someone who is a little too, in their perception, extreme. And then DeSantis' candidacy has had some very real problems. So I think they see Nikki Haley with the momentum, and they say, she will basically be supportive of corporate America. She'll basically be supportive of a neoconservative foreign policy. Let's just get behind Nikki and get Trump over with. Let's move on to a new era. So I think that's the Wall Street interest. But she also, she said last night that Ron DeSantis was just jealous that these people were now supporting her. And actually, Reid Hoffman, Jamie Dimon, I Googled this, Jamie Dimon and Larry Fink. I mean, Ron DeSantis is like enemy number one of Larry Fink, but none of those guys were supportive of Ron DeSantis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. And none of those guys were supportive of Ron DeSantis. She's actually picking up new Dem-leaning billionaires. And I think that goes to the point. They sort of think that there might be some blood in the water, and that's their best bet at beating Trump.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right, let's talk about other ways the left has been spending its money, because you've written on this subject today. You write, the problem with elite complaints about elite schools. We've heard a lot from basically rich lefties lately who've been supporting many of these high-profile colleges across the country, which are now very publicly exposed as breeding grounds for some of the worst bigotry in the country. And you're watching some big lefty donors run away now and saying, I'm not supporting this. I can't believe I supported this in the first place. I refuse to finance all this anti-Semitism we're seeing. How did it get this way, Emily?
Yeah. No, and the article was really written in response to another left-leaning billionaire, Bill Ackman, tweeting his outrage about the sort of laughable congressional testimony that the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and Penn gave earlier this week, where Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, pressed them hard on whether calls for a genocide of Jewish people would constitute harassment and bullying under their codes of conduct. And they hedged, they were just protecting themselves with this crazy tangled legalese. It was laughable. And the point is, this has been going on for decades. And I think it's great that some people on the center left are waking up to it now, that they've seen since October 7th. There's some real racism and bigotry that has blossomed, that has metastasized in the shadow of our cultural interest in what's happening in academia. That's great. But I think what's more important to realize is that this is something that needs to be, dug up by its roots. And its roots, I don't believe that a lot of these center-left billionaires are willing to actually attack the roots. I think it's really important for people to kind of humbly start thinking about the foundation of their own moral worldviews, their own moral order, and realize that, if you were born in the last half century, there's a very good chance you're buying into some faulty premises about the world, about the United States, about the United States history and its role in the world. This is all coming from something that is much more common than even people on the center left realize. They've allowed something to fester. And if they want to tackle the problem of anti-Semitism on college campuses, they have to tackle a much deeper problem, and that's really simply just moral relativism.
I mean, when you teach everybody that their race is their destiny, this is, of course, the obvious effect of that. This is the result of that. Like, people start thinking their race is their destiny, and they judge other people on the basis of immutable characteristics. It's all over these campuses, and I've been saying throughout all of this, like, it's a little rich for all of these rich guys to be coming out and going, like, I'm not going to fund any of this anymore. Where have you been? You've been funding this for years.
Exactly. It's the world of my truth and your truth and multiple truths with an S, making the truth plural. It's not a world that anybody actually wants to live in. It's a world that maybe people were really comfortable with for a few decades because it made them sort of feel good about themselves and their contributions to the world. But it's ultimately a horrible world to live in, the world of my truth and your truth. And that's what this is about at the end of the day is, when you go through the public school system and, go to some of these colleges, like I did, I was born in 1993, went to public school in Wisconsin, went to George Washington University out here in DC, and you take a step back and realize what was planted, the seeds that were planted in your mind over the course of that education, over the course of the cultural conditioning that you got from Hollywood movies, et cetera, you really realize that unless you've been intentional about your faith, unless you've been intentional about American history, about truth, then you may have slipped into some really, really bad premises about this country, about your community, about your neighbors. And that takes a whole lot more than condemning anti-Semitism. That's going to require condemning moral relativism essentially at its core.
Yeah. And the truth is, like, we're all far more impressionable than we all want to admit. It's like, over time, if that canvas is covered in all sorts of awful things, then it kind of makes you an awful person. And you should, take an inventory, and assess your political ideology, figure out whether or not you're on the right track, actually look deeply at these things and not just credulously believe everybody around you, which is, of course, why we're in
really
so much
well
chaos. Hey,
yeah, I agree with that.
Emily, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, as always.
Thanks for having me, Vince.
Of course, Emily Jashinsky over at The Federalist and on Counterpoint.